The story of the Gospel of Philip begins with mystery, discovery, and the search for meaning. Imagine an ancient text, hidden for centuries beneath the sands of Egypt, waiting for the right moment to speak again. When it finally resurfaced, it brought with it a voice that challenged the familiar, a voice that dared to describe love, union, and divine truth in ways that felt both strange and deeply moving. For many who encounter it today, the Gospel of Philip is not just a historical artifact, but an invitation to see faith in a new light, to explore paths that were once closed off, and to wonder what Christianity might have looked like if these words had not been cut away. The Gospel itself does not read like the familiar stories of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It does not tell us about Jesus walking on water or healing the sick. Instead, it offers a collection of sayings and reflections, fragments of insight that point to deeper mysteries. At first glance, these passages may seem scattered, but beneath their surface lies a vision of spirituality centered on intimacy with the divine, on the healing power of love, and on knowledge that awakens the soul. This difference in tone and style immediately raises questions. Why was such a gospel left out, and what did it mean for those who treasured it enough to hide it? The time of its writing was a period of great diversity within early Christianity. Communities were scattered across the ancient world, and each interpreted the message of Jesus in its own way. Some emphasized authority and order, others sought mystical union and hidden wisdom. The Gospel of Philip belongs to the latter stream, offering a glimpse into a form of faith where love was celebrated as the very heart of transformation. To later leaders, this diversity became a threat, and the drive to create unity meant cutting away voices that did not fit. Yet, even as it was excluded, the Gospel of Philip carried ideas that continue to resonate with those who seek something beyond the surface of religion. The rediscovery of this gospel in the 20th century was nothing short of extraordinary. Buried in a clay jar near Nag Hammadi in Egypt, along with dozens of other texts, it came to light at a time when the world was more open to exploring suppressed traditions. Its words, fragile and fragmented, were carefully restored and translated, giving modern readers a chance to hear voices from the earliest centuries of the faith. This discovery not only changed scholarship, it also stirred the imagination of countless people who began to wonder what other treasures might still lie hidden and what truths had been lost along the way. What makes the Gospel of Philip so powerful is not only its content, but its very survival. Against all odds, through centuries of obscurity, it endured. Its endurance reminds us that truth has a way of resurfacing, that wisdom cannot be permanently buried, and that voices once silenced may rise again to inspire. When we read it today, we do so not only as students of history, but as seekers of meaning. Its message challenges us to look deeper, to embrace mystery, and to rediscover the power of love as the heart of faith. If you find yourself drawn to these kinds of explorations into hidden texts and forgotten voices, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future videos. Give this video a like if it spoke to you, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The story of the Gospel of Philip's rediscovery begins in 1945 in a place far from the centers of Christian authority. In the desert near Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a collection of ancient manuscripts was unearthed by local farmers. What initially seemed like a bundle of old, fragile papyrus turned out to be one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds of the 20th century. Among the codices found, written in Coptic, was the Gospel of Philip. After lying buried for centuries, the words of this gospel resurfaced, offering modern readers a glimpse into the spiritual imagination of early Christian communities that had been forgotten or deliberately suppressed. The Nag Hammadi Library, as it is now called, contained more than 50 texts, many of which belonged to traditions often described as Gnostic. These writings emphasize knowledge, not simply in the intellectual sense, but as a kind of spiritual awakening or recognition of the divine within. The Gospel of Philip was grouped among these, and while it shares certain traits with them, it also carries its own distinctive voice. The collection as a whole revealed how rich and diverse early Christianity had been before the boundaries of orthodoxy were firmly drawn. The manuscripts were in poor condition when discovered, fragile after centuries of being buried in a clay jar. Some portions were missing, some passages fragmented, yet enough survived for translators and scholars to piece together the message of the Gospel of Philip. The survival itself feels remarkable, as if the text had been waiting beneath the sand for the right time to speak again. The fact that it endured centuries of obscurity and silence makes its reappearance even more compelling, as though history itself was reminding us that suppressed voices never remain buried forever. The historical setting of the Nag Hammadi discovery must be understood in relation to the early church. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, debates raged within Christianity about what constituted true teaching and what was heresy. Groups that valued mystical interpretation and hidden knowledge often found themselves pushed to the margins. Texts like the Gospel of Philip, which stressed spiritual union and intimate love as the path to divine truth, were at odds with leaders who prioritized order, control, and clearly defined doctrine. These writings were not destroyed entirely, but many were hidden, perhaps by monks who once read them in secret and who feared persecution if their possession became known. The rediscovery of these texts in modern times had profound implications for biblical scholarship. For centuries, knowledge of early Christianity came mainly through the writings of the Church Fathers, many of whom described alternative teachings only to condemn them. The Nag Hammadi discovery allowed scholars to see these traditions in their own words, rather than through the lens of their opponents. The Gospel of Philip, in particular, revealed a world of thought where spiritual transformation was not confined to institutional sacraments, but could be experienced directly and personally. The impact extended beyond scholars into the wider public. Readers who encountered translations of the Gospel of Philip in the decades following its discovery were often struck by its beauty, its strangeness, and its sense of mystery. Some saw in it a missing piece of Christian spirituality that had been denied to later generations. Others viewed it with suspicion, concerned that it contradicted long-held doctrines. Whether embraced or resisted, the text could not be ignored. Its words carried a weight that stirred curiosity and debate alike. One reason the Gospel of Philip continues to attract attention is that it challenges assumptions about what early Christianity looked like. Instead of a uniform faith marching toward a unified canon, the picture that emerges is one of diversity, disagreement, and experimentation. Some communities celebrated sacraments like baptism and Eucharist in ways familiar to us today, while others infused those rituals with deeper symbolic meanings, connecting them to ideas of spiritual marriage and mystical union. The Gospel of Philip gives us direct access to that diversity. The Nag Hammadi also highlights the precarious nature of ancient texts. Entire libraries may have existed that are now lost forever, yet this one bundle of codices managed to survive against all odds. Every surviving word carries the weight of that survival, reminding us how fragile the preservation of history can be. The Gospel of Philip speaks across centuries because someone, long ago, believed it was worth protecting, even if it meant hiding it in the desert sands. Among the themes that run through the Gospel of Philip, none stands out more clearly than the profound emphasis on love and union. The text repeatedly returns to the image of the relationship between humanity and the divine as a form of intimacy, often expressed through the language of marriage. It describes a mystical joining sometimes called the bridal chamber, an image that has puzzled and fascinated readers ever since the text resurfaced. At its heart, this language points to a belief that true spiritual transformation is not about external compliance, but about entering into an inseparable union with God. For early Christian leaders who valued strict adherence to doctrine and practice, such language carried risks. Speaking of divine union in terms of marital intimacy blurred the line between metaphor and reality, and it opened the door to interpretations that could not easily be controlled. To the community that preserved the Gospel of Philip, however, these images were not dangerous but liberating. Love was not simply an emotion or an ethical duty, but the very pathway to the divine presence. The bridal chamber imagery in the text does not seem to describe a literal ritual, though some scholars believe it may have had a symbolic counterpart in early Christian practice. More likely, it functioned as a metaphor for the deepest level of union between the human soul and God, where barriers dissolve and transformation takes place. To those who embrace this teaching, the highest form of salvation was not just forgiveness of sins, but a radical transformation of being that came through love and intimacy with the divine mystery. This vision of love extends beyond individual emotion into cosmic significance. The Gospel of Philip suggests that love is the force that unites opposites, heals divisions, and restores harmony. Where other writings focused heavily on sin, law, and judgment, Philip shifts attention toward love as the creative and redemptive power of existence. To modern readers, this feels both refreshing and radical, a reminder that Christianity was not always presented in the same categories that later became dominant. The text also reflects a deep fascination with mystery. Many of its sayings point to truths that cannot be fully explained, only experienced. The bridal chamber itself is described as something hidden, a reality that reveals itself only to those who enter into its embrace. Such mystery was part of the allure of this gospel for its community, offering a spiritual depth that transcended ordinary religious practice. For the institutional church, however, such language was problematic, since it suggested that ultimate truth lay beyond the reach of public teaching and clerical authority. Love, as portrayed in the Gospel of Philip, also carries an element of healing. The fragmented human condition, marked by separation and loss, is restored through union with the divine. In this sense, salvation is not only about the future, but about a present transformation in which individuals rediscover their true identity. The emphasis on healing and restoration resonates with many who long for a faith that speaks to the brokenness of life in practical and deeply personal ways. It is important to see that this love is not portrayed as sentimental. It is demanding, transformative, and at times unsettling. The union it describes requires letting go of false identities and embracing a truth that redefines the self. Such radical language helps explain why the text provoked suspicion. Leaders of the Orthodox tradition feared that unregulated interpretations of love and union could lead believers away from accepted teaching. Yet for those drawn to Philip's vision, this very freedom was its beauty. When readers today encounter these passages, they often find themselves moved by their timeless quality. The language of union, intimacy, and love speaks across centuries, echoing the human longing for connection with something greater than ourselves. Whether interpreted literally, symbolically, or mystically, the central idea remains powerful. Love is not secondary to faith, but the very heart of it. The Gospel of Philip stands as a witness to a form of Christianity where love was not merely commanded, but celebrated as the path to divine transformation. Alongside its emphasis on love and union, the Gospel of Philip devotes great attention to knowledge, but not knowledge in the ordinary sense of facts or information. Instead, it points to a deeper, hidden wisdom that transforms those who grasp it. This concept, often described as gnosis, refers to direct awareness of divine truth. For the writers and readers of the Gospel of Philip, such knowledge was essential for salvation, not in the sense of intellectual mastery, but as an awakening of the heart and spirit to reality as it truly is. The text suggests that rituals such as baptism, anointing, or the Eucharist carry meaning only when they are understood in this deeper light. Without knowledge, they risk becoming empty gestures. With knowledge, however, they become living experiences of transformation. This perspective sharply contrasted with the growing emphasis of the institutional church, which sought to define salvation through outward participation in sacraments under clerical authority. The Gospel of Philip instead shifted attention inward to the individual's encounter with the divine mystery. The pursuit of hidden knowledge was never about secrecy for its own sake. Rather, it reflected the conviction that divine truth could not be fully captured in words or external rules. It had to be discovered through experience, through a journey of awakening. For this reason, many of the sayings in the Gospel of Philip read like puzzles or fragments of insight, designed to provoke reflection rather than provide straightforward instruction. The text invites readers to move beyond surface understanding into a deeper awareness. Such emphasis on hidden knowledge was threatening to leaders who sought to unify Christianity under one coherent doctrine. If truth could be encountered directly within the individual, then institutional authority risked losing its grip. For this reason, Gospels like Philip's were often branded as dangerous, even heretical. The conflict was not simply about ideas, but about power and control. Knowledge, in this sense, became more than just a spiritual theme, it became a political battleground. The appeal of hidden knowledge is that it recognizes the depth of human longing. Many believers were not satisfied with simple formulas or external rules. They hungered for direct experience of the divine. The Gospel of Philip spoke to this hunger by pointing beyond outward forms to the reality they symbolized. It challenged its readers to seek truth within themselves, to discover the divine presence, not as something distant, but as something already planted in the soul. One striking aspect of this gospel is its insistence that ignorance is the true enemy. To live in ignorance is to remain blind to the reality of who we are and what God is. Knowledge, by contrast, brings freedom, clarity, and transformation. This echoes a theme found across many traditions, that awakening is not about becoming something new, but about remembering what has always been true. The Gospel of Philip presents salvation not as an external reward, but as the unveiling of a hidden reality already present within. Passages that describe knowledge often pair it with imagery of light, vision, and recognition. Those who know are those who see clearly, who awaken from illusion into truth. This imagery resonates with the universal human experience of moving from confusion into clarity. The emphasis on sight and recognition reinforces the idea that gnosis is not primarily intellectual, but experiential. It is about seeing with new eyes. By centering faith on hidden knowledge, the Gospel of Philip challenged the structures of power in its time, but it also offered an enduring message for seekers across history. It reminds us that spiritual truth cannot be confined to institutions, books, or rituals alone. It lives in the awakened heart and in the experience of encountering the divine mystery firsthand. This emphasis on inner awakening helps explain why the text was suppressed, yet it also explains why it continues to inspire those searching for depth and authenticity. The exclusion of the Gospel of Philip from the New Testament was not a matter of chance. It was part of a larger process in which the early church carefully selected which writings would define orthodoxy and which would be rejected or suppressed. Understanding why Philip was cut requires looking at the interplay of theology, politics, and authority in the early centuries of Christianity. Decisions about the canon were never neutral. They were driven by the desire to establish unity and control in a rapidly expanding movement. One reason the Gospel of Philip was excluded lies in its theology. Its emphasis on mystical union, hidden knowledge, and transformative love stood apart from the teachings that the Church sought to promote as universal. Leaders feared that such ideas would encourage diversity of interpretation, undermining efforts to define a single authoritative doctrine. By cutting texts like Philip's, the Church reduced the risk of believers turning to alternative understandings of salvation that bypassed clerical structures. Another reason was political. As Christianity grew from a persecuted movement to an institution recognized and eventually favored by the Roman Empire, the need for cohesion became urgent. A divided church would be vulnerable to internal strife and external attack. Excluding texts that fostered independent thought helped to secure unity, even at the cost of silencing voices that had once been part of the movement's diversity. In this way, the canon became not only a theological boundary, but also a political tool. The Gospel of Philip also posed a social challenge. Its language of love and union carried implications of equality that unsettled hierarchical structures. If divine intimacy was accessible to every believer through inner awakening, then distinctions of rank, gender, and authority began to lose their force. Such ideas were empowering, but for leaders seeking to establish order and control, they were destabilizing. Cutting Philip was a way of reinforcing the social hierarchy of the Church. Fear of heresy also played a major role. The word heresy in early Christianity often referred not just to error, but to any teaching that threatened the unity of the community. Since Philip's gospel resonated with Gnostic traditions, it was easy to brand it as heretical and dangerous. By excluding it, leaders could draw a clear boundary between true teaching and false teaching, strengthening their authority over what counted as legitimate Christian belief. Yet the act of exclusion did not erase the text completely. Instead, it created an official version of Christianity that was narrower than the reality of its beginnings. The cutting of Philip's gospel and others like it shaped not only the canon, but also the imagination of generations that followed. The church that emerged was more centralized, more uniform, and more controlled than it might have been had these texts been preserved openly. The decisions of those early centuries continue to echo in the structure of Christianity today. When we look back, it becomes clear that the exclusion of the Gospel of Philip was both an act of protection and an act of suppression. It protected the church from fragmentation, but it also suppressed voices that carried profound insights into love, union, and knowledge. The cost of unity was the loss of diversity. What was cut was not only a text, but an entire perspective on what it means to follow Christ. The very survival of the Gospel of Philip reminds us that suppression is never absolute. Despite being excluded, hidden, and nearly lost, its words endured, waiting for the moment when they could speak again. What was cut from the canon was not cut from history altogether. It still matters because it forces us to ask what kind of Christianity we inherited, what voices were silenced, and how those silences continue to shape faith today. The Gospel of Philip may have been excluded from the New Testament, but its voice has not been silenced. Across centuries of hidden existence, and especially since its rediscovery, its teachings have continued to echo in the hearts of those searching for depth beyond the surface of religion. What once threatened the authority of the institutional church has now become a source of inspiration for individuals seeking a more intimate and transformative encounter with the divine. These echoes of suppressed truth remind us that wisdom cannot be buried forever, and that even forgotten texts can shape the future. One of the most striking resonances of the Gospel of Philip is its portrayal of divine intimacy. The language of love and union may have once seemed dangerous, but today it speaks to a widespread hunger for spirituality that feels personal, authentic, and alive. For many modern seekers, Faith is no longer about blind obedience or abstract doctrines, but about the lived experience of relationship with God. The imagery of the bridal chamber, with its deep sense of mystery and closeness, continues to stir the imagination of those who long for a faith that speaks to the heart as well as the mind. The text's emphasis on hidden knowledge also finds new relevance in a world where many people feel disillusioned by surface-level religion. In an age of information where answers are readily available, the Gospel of Philip reminds us that true wisdom is not simply about collecting facts. It is about awakening, seeing with new eyes, and recognizing divine reality within and around us. This message resonates across spiritual traditions, drawing people who are dissatisfied with shallow expressions of belief and who yearn for something that can transform their inner life. Another echo of this suppressed gospel is its message of healing and restoration. At a time when many people carry wounds from religious institutions that emphasized fear, guilt, or control, the Gospel of Philip offers an alternative vision. It suggests that salvation is about wholeness, about being restored to our true identity through love and knowledge. This healing perspective appeals not only to Christians, but also to those outside traditional faith structures who seek a spirituality of compassion and renewal. The themes of the Gospel of Philip have even found their way into broader cultural conversations. Artists, writers, and thinkers have drawn inspiration from its imagery of union, transformation, and hidden wisdom. Its influence extends beyond theological debates into literature, psychology, and philosophy, where it becomes a touchstone for exploring the depth of human experience. By inspiring creativity across different fields, the text proves that suppressed truths can still shape culture in unexpected ways. The very fact that the Gospel of Philip was once silenced adds to its appeal today. People are often drawn to what has been hidden, sensing that forbidden knowledge may hold treasures overlooked by tradition. While this curiosity can sometimes veer into speculation or myth, it also reflects a deeper recognition that official history is never the whole story. The rediscovery of Philip's words reminds us that history has many layers, and that suppressed voices may contain the very wisdom we need to hear in our own time. The echoes of this gospel also challenge the boundaries of religious exclusivity. While rooted in the early Christian movement, its themes resonate with spiritual teachings from other traditions as well. The idea of divine union can be found in Sufi poetry, Hindu mysticism, and Jewish Kabbalistic thought. The pursuit of hidden knowledge parallels paths of meditation and enlightenment across cultures. By connecting these echoes, the Gospel of Philip becomes part of a broader conversation about humanity's search for the divine across history. In communities today that value spiritual exploration, the Gospel of Philip continues to inspire reflection and practice. Some see it as a guide to reimagining sacraments, not as rigid rituals, but as symbols of deeper transformation. Others turn to its words as a reminder that faith is not about fear, but about love and intimacy with God. Its echoes call people to rediscover dimensions of Christianity that were once silenced, but are now finding a voice again. These echoes are not simply about recovering a lost text. They are about recovering a way of seeing faith that values love, mystery, and inner awakening. They remind us that history is never final, and that what was once rejected can become a source of hope for later generations. The Gospel of Philip continues to matter not only because of its content, but because its survival itself testifies to the resilience of truth in the face of suppression. The Gospel of Philip matters today because the questions it raises are still the questions people wrestle with in their spiritual lives. In a world often dominated by institutional religion, many find themselves asking whether faith must be defined by rigid structures, or whether it can be discovered through direct experience of the divine. The Gospel of Philip speaks into this struggle by pointing toward a path where intimacy, love, and hidden knowledge shape the heart of faith. Far from being an ancient curiosity, its message engages some of the most pressing spiritual needs of our time. One reason it matters is the longing for authenticity. Many people feel that modern religion has become overly concerned with appearances, traditions, or authority, leaving little room for personal encounter with God. The Gospel of Philip's vision of transformation through love resonates with this longing. It suggests that faith is not about external conformity, but about discovering the divine presence within. For those weary of empty ritual, its words offer a call to authenticity, to a spirituality that feels real and lived rather than imposed. The text also addresses the hunger for depth in a shallow world. With endless distractions, entertainment, and surface-level connections, people often feel starved for meaning. The Gospel of Philip's language of hidden knowledge and mystery reminds us that life is more than appearances. It encourages a search for the unseen, for the deeper truths that lie beneath the noise of daily existence. In this way, it becomes a companion for those who seek to move beyond superficiality into a richer, more profound encounter with reality. In addition, the Gospel of Philip challenges the assumption that access to God must be mediated through institutions alone. While it does not dismiss the importance of community or shared practice, it insists that true salvation comes through awakening to divine reality within. This message matters deeply today, especially for those who feel alienated from institutional religion but still yearn for connection with the sacred. It reassures seekers that God is not confined to buildings, rituals, or hierarchies, but is present in the depths of the human soul. The emphasis on love as the path to transformation also holds timeless relevance. In a world often marked by division, fear, and violence, the Gospel of Philip reminds us that love is not secondary to faith, but central. Its portrayal of union and intimacy as the highest form of salvation speaks to the human need for connection, healing, and reconciliation. This message cuts across religious and cultural lines, offering hope for a humanity that longs to be restored to unity. The text's survival into modern times also speaks to the resilience of suppressed truths. In an era where many feel silenced or overlooked, the Gospel of Philip becomes a symbol of hope that no voice can be erased forever. Its re-emergence reminds us that truth has a way of resurfacing, even after centuries of suppression. For communities and individuals struggling to find their voice, this story of survival becomes a powerful source of encouragement. Another reason it matters is its ability to bridge ancient wisdom with contemporary spiritual practice. Modern readers often find in the Gospel of Philip insights that resonate with meditation, contemplation, and other practices of inner transformation. Its emphasis on awakening aligns with modern movements that value mindfulness and spiritual presence. By connecting with these practices, the text shows that ancient words can still guide modern lives. The Gospel of Philip also challenges us to reconsider the history we have inherited. It prompts questions about who decides what counts as truth, whose voices are heard and whose voices are silenced. In an age increasingly aware of marginalized perspectives, the story of Philip's exclusion and rediscovery speaks directly to ongoing conversations about power, authority, and justice. It reminds us that the shaping of tradition often involves exclusion, and that recovery of lost voices is part of healing that history. Ultimately, the Gospel of Philip matters because it calls humanity back to the essence of faith. It speaks of love as the transforming power, knowledge as awakening to truth, and union with God as the goal of life. These themes are as urgent now as they were in the early centuries. They remind us that spirituality is not about fear or control, but about entering into the mystery of divine presence with openness and love. In a fractured and restless world, that message continues to shine with surprising clarity. The Gospel of Philip has traveled a long and uncertain path, from its origins in the early Christian centuries to being hidden away in the sands of Egypt, to its rediscovery in the modern world. Its survival is remarkable, not only as an artifact of history, but as a testimony to the resilience of truth. What once was silenced now speaks again, and its voice continues to reach across time to remind us that wisdom cannot be permanently buried. The story of this gospel reflects the larger story of human faith, where voices are suppressed yet rise again, and where the search for God endures despite every attempt to control or limit it. The significance of this text lies not only in its content, but in its very survival. The fact that these words were hidden, preserved, and then uncovered centuries later suggests that truth has a way of resurfacing when the world is ready to hear it. For those who engage with its teachings today, the Gospel of Philip is not just an ancient manuscript, it is a living witness to the persistence of love, mystery, and hidden wisdom. It is a reminder that the story of faith is larger than any one tradition, and that the voice of the divine cannot be silenced by human authority. The resilience of this gospel mirrors the resilience of the human spirit. Just as the words of Philip endured centuries of obscurity, so too does the longing for connection with the divine endure across generations. People continue to seek authenticity, depth, and transformation. They continue to wrestle with questions of authority, truth, and meaning. The Gospel of Philip steps into that struggle with a message that is both ancient and timely, offering an alternative vision of faith centered on love, knowledge, and union with God. By reflecting on what was cut and why it matters, we uncover not only the history of early Christianity, but also the struggles of our own time. The choices made in the early centuries continue to shape the way Christianity is understood today, but the rediscovery of Philip's words shows that those choices were not final. The story is still unfolding, and suppressed truths continue to find their voice. The Gospel of Philip stands as a witness to the unfinished nature of faith, calling each generation to listen again to the wisdom of the past. The endurance of this text also carries a challenge. It asks us to consider whether we are open to voices that have been marginalized or dismissed in our own time. It calls us to question who defines truth and to recognize that the search for God is always larger than the boundaries imposed by institutions. By engaging with the Gospel of Philip, we are reminded that faith is not static but dynamic, not limited but expansive. At its core, this gospel testifies to the power of love as the path to transformation, to knowledge as awakening, and to union with God as the fulfillment of human longing. These truths remain as relevant today as they were in the early centuries, perhaps even more so in a world hungry for meaning and authenticity. The Gospel of Philip invites us to rediscover faith as an intimate, living reality, a journey of union with the divine mystery. In the end, the Gospel of Philip proves that words of truth cannot be erased. They may be cut from the canon, hidden in the desert, or silenced by authority, but they continue to live. They refuse to die because they speak to the deepest part of the human soul. They remind us that God's presence is never confined, that love endures, and that the search for truth will always find a way. The Gospel of Philip matters because it tells us something about history, but even more because it tells us something about ourselves. It shows that faith cannot be reduced to rules alone, that truth cannot be limited to a single perspective, and that love remains the most powerful force of all. Its words challenge, inspire, and comfort, echoing across time as an invitation to awaken to the mystery of God within. These words, once cut away, now return with a message that continues to shine with hope and light. If you enjoyed this journey into the Gospel of Philip and the wisdom it carries, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future explorations. Give this video a like to support the work, share your thoughts in the comments below, and pass it on to your friends and loved ones who might also find inspiration here. Your support helps keep these conversations alive and allows more people to discover voices of truth that refuse to be silenced.